So here inside my Distortion After Effects project, we have 3 small items that we're going to go through and create some really cool distortion effects just using a handful of filters from the Effect menu. So the first one we're going to look at is Spherize. So this is project number 1 in here called Spherize. And if we go to the main window and just take a look, I'm just going to play on here, and we just have a QuickTime movie playing in the background of a title sequence, and we've got some color just sort of flowing in behind here. What I want to do is see how Spherize can affect this. So what I'm going to do is make sure I select the layer down here inside my timeline. It's the QuickTime movie right here at the bottom. I'm going to come up to the Effect menu and go all the way down to Distort. And we'll see some of the filters we have a choice of. We're going to go straight down here and choose this one called Spherize. As soon as I select that, we're presented with a very straightforward dialog box. It asks us to choose a specific radius for the effect of Spherize and also its center point. We can see here it just says center of sphere. So if I take the radius here and just click and drag it up, you can see the distortion effect applying over the center of my lettering, which looks really cool. And the further we go, the kind of softer it gets on the outside until it's almost like we have a zoom. So what I'm going to do is come down here to round about 100. So we've got a sphere that's actually 200 pixels overall. We've got 100 in radius. And what I want to do is to make this look more effective. I want to make it into a bubble. So instead of just having this object where I could just pick up the center point and move it around, which in itself does a great effect, but we're kind of restricted to a circle here, so we need to style this up as best we can. So if we come back down to the timeline and turn on the top layer here in the timeline, which is Bubble PSD, and just select it just for this point so it's highlighted, you can see this is a transparent Photoshop file that I've imported in, and it's got an alpha channel in it, and I've actually cast a drop shadow off the background also, and if I pick the layer up and move it around, you can see that effect. What I want to do is obviously apply the distortion in the center here. Now what I'm not going to do is to apply the distortion to this layer. I still want to keep that attached to the one underneath. If I distort this one, I'll obviously distort the shape of the bubble. So I want to combine the two together, but I want to tell the Spherize that's on the bottom layer here to attach itself to the center point of this layer at the top. And that's very, very easy for me to do. I'm going to do it through an expression. So let me pull this down to the bottom corner. We know that the bubble is down here, and the Spherize we know is still in the center. And then when we join these together, you'll see the effect take place. Back down in the timeline, we're just going to access a couple of properties. So with the bubble layer selected, I'm going to hit the P key to access its position properties. So obviously wherever we drag this is where it's going to move in relocation to the page. Let me just undo that. We'll make sure our time cursor is right back at the beginning just in case we want to animate this. But then down here on the blood smear movie, I'm going to take the Spherize effect here, drop down its properties, and we know there are only 2 of them, and the center of the sphere is the one I wish to lock to this option here. What I'm going to do, instead of applying keyframes, I'm going to use an expression which will dynamically copy whatever position properties we put in here for the bubble. It's very simple to add an expression. All we do, instead of clicking on the stopwatch to add a keyframe, I'm just going to hold down the Option key or the Alt key on the PC and click on that stopwatch, and you see it creates a JavaScript expression for me, and it's asking me to key in the information that it needs. Now I don't have to key everything in. It's very straightforward language to put in there, but what I'm going to do is an even simpler option. I'm going to pick up what's called the Pick Whip tool here, and it allows me to point somewhere in my timeline and find another layer or property which I wish to copy the values of. And I'm going to come here and say, please copy the center of the sphere. I want to copy the position values of the bubble. And when I select that, you'll see it's now put the JavaScript in there. It says this comp layer is going to copy the bubble's position. What I need to do is say enter and say OK. And as soon as I hit that, you can see that the Spherize has now jumped across into this corner of the screen here, exactly where the bubble was. So let me just scroll back up the timeline. Let's make sure the bubble is still highlighted. I'll just close down all our options to tidy it up. And now we can just move the bubble around screen and animate it any way we want to. So let's come up to the comp window and just move that bubble around. And you'll see now we've got this really nice distortion effect with the bubble moving around. We've got the drop shadow. It really does look like it's kind of a 3D object and it's refracting whatever's going on behind it. So you can see with a very simple Photoshop layer and just one filter that only has a couple of very easy options, a simple expression can tie all this together and give us a wonderful Spherize effect. So that's a good place to start with all these distortion options. So let's go ahead and close this composition down. We're going to go into our next project, which is called Smear. That's project 2 here in the window. And what we're going to do with this is use the Smear filter, which is very similar to Spherize, but it addresses some of the restrictions of Spherize. We can actually adjust the shape and intensity of the values that are being pushed and pulled and distorted using masks. So this makes it a really cool filter to play with. So again, in the timeline, we just have 2 simple layers. We've got a title in the top left-hand side and then the QuickTime movie playing in the background. again, we're going to add an effect to this movie to distort it. So in the timeline, just select the movie, it's highlighted there, go back up to the effect menu and down to distort again, and this time come down and choose smear. Now when the effect controls palette comes up, you'll see that we do have a lot of options in here for various things we can choose, animate and set. Not really long, but there's a few things in here we need to bear in mind. Before we do any of this, we need to create some masks. As you see, the most important part in here is the source mask and the boundary mask. So there are two mask layers between which it applies the smear effect. So let me just pull the window out of the way here. From your toolbox, let's come and select the rectangular mask tool over here on the right-hand side. And I'm just going to put my cursor slightly outside of the comp window and draw a mask that covers the whole thing. So this just defines our outer boundary. Okay. And then what I'll do is select the oval mask tool. You could use the Bezier one if you want to. I'm just going to start with a simple oval. And let's draw another mask somewhere inside that boundary area. So just decide wherever you want to put it. It doesn't have to be exact at this point because we can animate it afterwards. So once those two are drawn, the first thing we should do really is name them and make it so that they're easy to identify, because when we use the effect window here, obviously we have a choice of mask 1 and mask 2, and it'd be good to know exactly which one is which. So come back down to the timeline. The QuickTime movie here is highlighted. Hit the M key and it will reveal any of the masks that we have on the layer, and obviously we have 2. If I click on mask 1 and highlight it, you can see it highlights those edges around the very outside, so we know that mask 1 is the boundary edge. Okay, so if we want to, just hit return and type in the word boundary for that mask and just hit return or enter to OK that. And then obviously mask 2 is going to be the oval in the center, which is going to be the effect. So I'm going to hit return and type the word effect for that one. It's cool to name them, then you can specify exactly what you want and it's easier to understand. Now I'll leave these options down here because we are going to affect the mask shape in just a second, and that will allow us to use a wonderful distort effect that is animated. So let's come back up to the effect controls window and have a look at a few of these options. So the first thing we want to do is specify these masks. So the source mask, the one that is going to be used for the actual effect, is going to be obviously effect, and the boundary is the one we specified on the outside. So that's easy enough reason for naming them exactly as I did. Now once we've chosen them, we have a few options as to how it actually works and what we see. Now at the moment we're not seeing anything in the background that hints, a change or some kind of guideline as to what's going on. The reason for that is the effect itself is not selected here inside my palette. Even though we're working on the layer and we can see its masks, until I select the word smear, I won't actually see where the effect is being applied. And you see now I have this sort of black replicated edge which shows me an exact version of the mask that we have in the background. And this is what's going to be doing all the work. Now you see by default it's not in the same position as this one. And that's because right here, the next option down we have is mask offset. And that chooses an offset value. It's kind of generic. It's based very much in the center of the layer, even though the mask itself is not, but you can quite easily pick that up and just choose a different location. So I might want the offset to be up here, and you see that that shape just simply moves into a new location. What I'll do is just hit Command Z, undo that. I'm happy to leave that where it is. I don't need anything more specific than those settings. What we can also do is specify mask rotation. So if you want to, I can pull that round and you see the mask is rotating in a different direction. So we don't have to stay with the shape that I have. But this will also rotate the effect, so you get kind of a twist. So that was definitely one you wish to play with at a future date. So I'm just going to reset that background to 0. Now the important ones are right down here, mask scale and mask percent. And this is how much the effect is applied overall to this mask. So if I come here and say mask scale, you can see it's set to 1. And that means it's exactly the same size as the original mask. If I click on there and maybe go halfway between this and the next value, 1.5, you'll see that the mask has grown effectively to 150% of its original size. So it means that you don't have to worry about scaling this mask up in order for the overall effect to enlarge, and you can animate this on the fly if you want to. I'm going to bring that down just a little bit less, about 1.1, so it's only going to grow about 10%, and we can animate that on the fly if we want to. But definitely the most important option is percent, and this is how much effect is applied. So if I click and drag on that, we should get our dynamic resolution preview kicking in, because obviously we have a fair amount of effect work going on here in the background. And I'm going to go to round about 55% just so we can see what's going on. So if I pull the window out of the way now, you can see that we've actually pulled this across to one side and made a little bit of distortion. So let's come back and specify some of the other settings. Let's maybe go back to mask scale, and let's just increase that again maybe to 1.5. Okay, and you can see the central area is now starting to bulge out. It's looking really cool. And if you want to, just go in and increase that percentage even more. And as you do, you can see the distortion happening nicely around the edge. So I've gone up to 100 there, and you see now this wonderful curved edge around the right-hand side as if we have a large shape underneath, which is pushing itself through the shape in the background. If I pull the window out of the way, just hit Shift-Command-H and hide all those edges, you get the real effect here. It's very, very different to what we had with Spherize. So let's bring the edges back. They're pretty important. At the moment, the effect I have, to my liking, is a little on the large side. So I'm going to go back to mask scale here. I'm going to push this back down to about 1.35. Let's just bring it down about there. Okay. Now, at the moment, the distortion is also very oval, and that's because the mask itself has not changed shape, and this is where it really becomes fun. What I can do is now click on the mask to highlight its Bezier handles here, same as you would any mask. And as I start dragging it, obviously it's going to distort the mask that is being generated by the smear effect. So as I pull the mask shape around, the smear effect is also adjusting its own mask and pulling this area back in up here. We almost have a curve up here that replicates what's going on. Again, if you want to see the effect change, you can just come back to the Effect Controls window and select the effect here, and you can see the mask itself has followed that exactly. And likewise, if I come in now that the effect is still highlighted and select one of these Bezier handles and twist it, you can see that mask shape replicating all the motion that I apply. So let's just choose something around about here. Okay, so this is a good starting point. What I want to do now is apply animation to it. So I want the mask to change shape over time. I want it to almost look like there is something breathing under here. I kind of want a pulsing motion. So maybe there's even a heart underneath this background that's just moving in and out. So what we'll do is come down to our timeline and apply a keyframe. We're at 0 seconds. Apply a keyframe for our effect mask shape. We're not going to affect the boundary. That one can stay where it is. But mask shape here would like a keyframe applied. That's where we can now start with the exact shape of this mask. Now what I might do is say every second is going to breathe in, and every 2 seconds it will breathe out. And then what I can do is, obviously, once I've created 2 simple keyframes that say that, I can copy and paste them down the timeline and keep the motion even. So what I'll do is I'll come across quickly to 2 seconds on the timeline. I have a keyframe here already at the value that I want to start with and end with at 0 and 2 seconds. And I'm just going to copy that, Command-C or Control-C, and paste it, Command-V and Control-V, into 2 seconds. So over that period of 2 seconds, the mask itself is not changing shape. But now if we come back to 1 second, let's go in and animate the mask and make whatever changes we think are necessary. So let's maybe take this left-hand point, let's drag it out to this side. And you see the dynamic resolution is kicking in there as well. If we want to speed it up a little bit more, what we can do is take down the quality of the composition, maybe down to half or even down to third quality. And then that will reduce everything. So the mask will be a little bit quicker to pull around in the background because dynamic resolution doesn't have to work so hard. All I'm concentrating on here really is the shape of the mask. And don't forget, everything we do is being multiplied by a certain percentage because of the shape of the effect mask for smear is much bigger than the one we started with. So I just pull this around into different locations, and that will pretty much set me where I need to be. So if I just come back to the start of the timeline, go back to 0 seconds, and let's just scroll our way easily through the timeline just a bit at a time. And obviously it will bring up the dynamic resolution preview, but you can see that as we scroll through that, it's bringing in the shape changes for the mask itself. Okay, now with it back there, I'm going to hit 0 and do a RAM preview of that because I do want to see how this effect is looking. And you can see it's actually rendering extremely fast. That's almost 1 second done. It reaches a point. It has to basically regenerate its effect at every keyframe. Then it comes back down, and at 2 seconds it stops. If I click there, we now have the real-time playback. And you'll see that the motion is very much really, really organic. It's moving around. It's coming up and coming down, but it's also very linear. And there's about 3 different settings that we need to apply to make that a lot smoother and make it look more like it's breathing. So let's click to cancel the RAM preview. Come back down to the timeline. You see our 3 keyframes here. I actually want to replicate those along the timeline first so we have the full motion of breathing. But then what we're going to do is smooth those out using an ease function. So what I'll do is highlight the last 2 of these keyframes, okay, because we have the second point and the third point. And I will copy those, Command-C into memory. Just come along on the timeline to 3 seconds and just hit paste. Okay, so now we have 4 keyframes for the breathing area, 5 overall. And with those 2 selected, I can now go across to 5 seconds and press Command-V again and paste in the final changes. So again, if we just quickly go to the comp window and do a preview, you can see that we have the initial frame, There we go, it's breathing up, reaches 2 seconds, turns around and starts its way down again. So now we have that constant motion of up and down and up, but this is where we need to smooth everything out. Quickly come back down to the timeline and I'll just drag across all of those keyframes to highlight them. And then on any of the keyframes, doesn't matter which one it is, I'm either going to right click on the PC or control click on the Mac to bring up our context sensitive menu here. And come down to my keyframe assistant and choose Easy Ease. And what that will do is it will smooth the motion of the mask into a keyframe so it slows down, and then it will slow the motion out so it kind of builds up speed gradually. So that will apply a nice amount of smoothing. But if I do drag through the timeline here, and we can see our changes in the background, the mask itself, you can see it comes down to that point gently, eases its way out again on the other side. But if we do a quick RAM preview of this, despite the fact that the mask shape keyframes have been eased in and eased out, the motion of the breathing is not having that effect. And that's because we need to specify this inside of the effects palette. So let's click and cancel that, bring the effects window back to the front, and we'll look at the last two options we have down here. First one here, it says elasticity. That's how fluid or how kind of backed up or easy flowing this particular effect is. I've got that set to the base option of stiff. Next options I have are less stiff. And eventually it works its way down the list until you get down to loose and liquid, and we even have a super fluid. Let me tell you and advise you now that as you go further down this list, your rendering times will greatly increase, purely because of the way it has to calculate the pixels to give them this more organic feel. That's why I'm using just the base option for this. It's worth trying, but do note a very great increase in rendering time. So I'm going to leave that one set, but the one that we want to specify here is the interpolation. Just drag that out. Interpolation method at the moment is set to linear. So it's not really using the ease in and ease out that we have on the keyframes, but if we set it to smooth, it will follow that exactly, and it will do its own ease in and ease out based on those breathing keyframes. So I could just quickly close that window down now. I'm going to set my comp window quality back to full here, because we're pretty much done, and I'll do one final RAM preview of this so we can see the finished effect. And there we can see the finished render. You see the effect working really nicely. We've got this wonderful sort of bulge motion happening underneath. Like I said, it's really organic. And the more shape changes you apply to the mask, you can get some wonderful effects here. Imagine if you draw a mask that's very loosely shaped, like kind of fingers or a hand, you can have that actually displace what's going on behind and have the fingers animate and almost drag themselves across the back of this fabric or this paper. But it's really cool that we also have it applied to a QuickTime so the movie has its own motion as well. So you can see that smear is really, really wonderful. Once you start playing around with the masks and some keyframe options, a really great filter. So what I'll do is just click and cancel that. I'm going to come back down now and close this composition and open our final one in here, which is called polar coordinates. Now double click that. And again, we're working with a very similar background. We have the same QuickTime movie that's behind and the director's name in the top left-hand side. But there's another couple of effects in here that I'm going to show you. Now, polar coordinates is a filter that a lot of people are familiar with inside of Photoshop, which allows you to effectively turn a rectangular image into a circle. So it kind of wraps it around a sphere. It's great for doing reflection maps in 3D packages. And likewise, if you have an image that has been turned into a sphere, polar coordinates can flick it around the other way and pull it back into a rectangle. Well, After Effects is going to allow us to do a very similar thing, but once we start mixing this filter with other effects, we can get some really, really cool sequences, again for doing things like titling and really good distortions on the background. So what I'm going to do to start with is select the blood smear movie again in the background here. Once again, go up to my Effect menu, back down to Distort, and this time we will choose Polar Coordinates. Now again, the Effect Controls window that comes up here is wonderfully simple. It has two very straightforward options. At the moment it says, what type of conversion do you want? Would you like polar to rectangular, or would you like rectangular to polar? Well, let's turn on the top one and give it a try. The next option you then have is interpolation, i.e. how much of the effect is being applied. So if I click and drag on that value and pull to the right-hand side, you'll see that the image in the background is really quickly distorted into a spherical shape. Now it's come all the way up to 100%. Let's pull the window out of the way, and you can see the finished result. Looks just like an image that's reflecting inside a spherical chrome object. Now, if you are doing reflections or something that wants to be seamless, you will end up with an edge like this if you haven't prepared the background images correctly. What you might want to do is play around in Photoshop or using offset filters as well as some pattern options to create images that are matching on the left and right hand side, so that when you do use this filter and pull them together, you'll have a seamless image down here, and that just looks really, really cool. Now this isn't the effect that I'm actually looking for. I want to go the other way. So I'm going to change it from rectangular to polar down to polar to rectangular. And you'll see with it set to 100%, things are a little bit crazy and quite distorted around. Almost looks like we've got some fabric here that's been stretched out and pinned down to the bottom here. Interesting effect if that's what you need. What I'm going to do is bring the interpolation all the way down to around about 20%. I want to start something fairly minimal, and we're going to animate it. So you can see I've got really nice distortion here. We can still read our type. If I just hit 0 and do a RAM preview at this point, let's just check everything's working in the background. So there's nothing really happens in the movie to start with. We've got our director's name flickering on the left here, but then we can see the color changes happening here in the QuickTime movie, all whilst the distortion is going on. So quick real-time preview of that. There we go. Okay, I want to animate the distortion now. I want it to happen over 6 seconds, which is the length of our animation. And I want to start around about 20% and then increase up to around 50% as we go along. So checking that I'm at 0 seconds in my timeline, I'll turn on a keyframe for interpolation, 20%. Move the time cursor all the way out to 6 seconds, so you're at the end of your animation. And let's change the interpolation value to about 50%. It's around about halfway, and then the effect doesn't get too out of control. We get some interesting little bands of color appearing here. So again, just hit the 0 key, do a preview of this, and we can see the effect build up. So the lettering gets really nicely distorted on the right-hand side and splits itself apart. It's almost forming these different color bands. And then you'll see when the red comes in, it gets some really nice washes of color that just look so cool. And again, we're just distorting a rendered QuickTime movie. You could do this to still footage or even to another composition if you want to. Okay, now that effect is pretty much as I want it to be, but I want to make it more dynamic than this. I want the overall polar coordinates animation to affect multiple layers at the same time. So for this, we're going to add the polar coordinates filter not to this layer, but to an adjustment layer, which we can then place above other layers and affect them all at the same time. Now, a nice little time saver is to actually save out the effect I've already got because it has keyframes in. There's no need for me to actually delete this, go to an adjustment layer, apply the effect again, and go through the whole keyframe motion. I can save this one out again for later use. The way we do that is simply go up to the Effect menu, go down here and choose Save Favorite, and wherever you want to save it on your hard drive, it will be saved with the suffix of FFX for Favorite Effects, and I will call that one Polar FFX, and I'll just save that into our folder for this lesson. Okay. Now that's been saved down to the drive, so I don't need this one anymore. I can just hit the delete key and remove the filter from the QuickTime movie. And let's just go ahead and close this one down. Then what we'll do is come up to the layer menu, and we're going to create a new adjustment layer. Before we do that, just double check that on your timeline here you are back at 0 seconds. Okay, drag your time cursor all the way back. Otherwise we might end up with an effect layer where we don't actually need it. Again, let's just go back to layer, let's go to new and create an adjustment layer. Now when that's created on screen, we don't see any change because the adjustment layer doesn't do anything until we apply changes or effects to it, okay? Now before we go and do that, what we're going to do is turn on the other layers in our composition so we can see our effects. So come down to the timeline and we'll see that I have 3 hidden layers. I've got one called Chosen Text. Going to leave that one for a second. But what I have here are 2 compositions that have already been made up in this After Effects file and have been nested inside of this one. And I'm going to turn them both on for a second. If we look in the composition window now and just do a quick RAM preview of that, you can see that I have these 2 pre-composed layers of text. So what I have is this white text that zooms into place, and there is a kind of a yellow, slightly faded one behind it. That's because the layer blending mode has been set to overlay, and the 2 of them are animated up in sections with motion blur so that they appear at different times. Now what I want to do is to the white text that comes in over the top here, I want that to stay in focus and not affected by our polar coordinates effect, but I do want the one in the background to be distorted exactly the same amount as the background QuickTime once we apply the overall effect to it. So here's our real-time preview. We can just see the names working their way up the screen there. Okay. So what we're going to do is add our polar coordinates effect to the very top layer. You should still have it selected, which is the adjustment layer 1. And if we go to the effect menu here, come down and say apply favorite, we can choose from our drive the polar favorite effects file that we just saved out, and just click open and the effect is automatically applied. Keyframes included. If we have a look here in the effect controls window, there's a stopwatch next to interpolation and it starts at 20%. It's exactly what we specified a second ago. So if we pull this out of the way and again just do a RAM preview, what you'll see now is we have all layers being affected. Even the director name in the top left-hand side here is being distorted, the background QuickTime, and both of our layers of text. So the easy way to get around this and utilize all the features we want, but only affecting the certain layers we want, is to change the stacking order inside the timeline of the adjustment layer itself, okay? Now, some very interesting distortion going on, but I do want to control it a little bit easier. So come back down to the timeline, you see our adjustment layer is on the top here, and also you notice the quality of our preview degraded slightly. That's because we haven't got anti-aliasing turned on, so let's just turn that option on. It's nice and smooth. All we need to do is now move it down where we want it. Now, I want to go down below director because that doesn't want to be affected. And don't forget, any layer that is below the adjustment layer is going to be affected. The next one down is the main title. That's the one that's white, and I want to leave that as it is. But the next one here is the smaller one in the background. I'm going to place it above that. So these two layers get edited, the QuickTime Movie and the pre-composed background text, but the title text stays clean. So if we come back to the comp window and do a round preview, again, just hit 0. We can see now our text is moving separately, and we get this really nice distortion in the background here of our lettering. Almost looks like it's casting light over here with the way it's reflecting in the background. And you see this lettering on top is much more visible and easier to see. And our motion blur is working on there also. You see the lettering even here has been turned around inside out because it's on the bottom end of the distortion. Once that one moves out of the way, it will actually flick itself around and come into focus over the top here. So you can see that the polar coordinates filter, once we combine it with a couple of others, is giving us a wonderful background effect that really, when you first play with polar coordinates, you wouldn't think was possible to achieve. Now, one final thing I want to do with polar coordinates, a little bit separate from what we're doing here, but it kind of adds to just another couple of options that you can try with this filter. Let me click and cancel that, take the effect controls window and just close it down. What I can do is come down to the timeline, turn on our very last layer, which is chosen text. And what I'll also do, because we only want to work on this layer on its own for a second so we can see the effects easily, I'm just going to hit the solo button here, which turns off all the other layers apart from this one. So if we look in the composition window, we see our text. Let's just highlight the layer so we know which one we're working on. And I'm going to bring up my effect controls window for this layer, and you'll see that I have two effects applied. I have path text, and I also have polar coordinates just loaded up and ready to go. Now, the path text filter is one that we used earlier on, so you should be familiar with all of these settings. So the way that this one is set up, if I just drop down the path text options here, I have it set up with some basic text running around the outside of a circle. So I've chosen it from the options over here. I've set type size and everything else the correct way. But what I do have control of here are the actual points of the circle itself. And as I drag them around, you'll see that the shapes change and the text will format itself, basing itself around the new circumference of this shape. So this in itself is a great little animation tool. However, let me just undo that, Command Z or Control Z, bring back the effect controls window and turn on the polar coordinates. I've already applied it and set it up accordingly, so as soon as you turn it on, you'll notice that there's kind of a 3D distortion to this type, which looks really, really easy. What I'm going to do though, you see if I pick up the line now and drag it around, as it gets further away, it kind of stretches back out to standard text. But as I come around this side and start to pull it around one side of the circle, check out what's happening here. It's actually moving in almost a 3D axis in front of the camera and working its way around the background. This is a really cool effect. Now, the closer you get in, obviously the letters, just like it did without polar coordinates, they will come closer together. And if you want to, you could kind of spin them around one on top of the other just by moving the circles over the top of each other. So if we wanted to animate this effect, make it seem a little bit more dynamic, almost as if the characters are in 3D and they're moving around quite randomly in 3D space, let's just apply some keyframes for this very simply. So inside the effect controls palette, it'll actually be done under path text, and it will be path options and then control points. And these are the points which the circle is using, so the tangent and the vertex. All I'll do is just very quickly turn on a keyframe for both of those, double checking you are at 0 in the timeline. And then I'll go to about maybe 1 second across, and let's just pick up this outer circle and drag it in this direction. So you see we're getting a bit of distortion around here. And then what I'll do is just move a little bit further along. I want to make a really fast effect here, so maybe just about 10 frames, so about 110. And then I'm going to throw this around very tightly upon itself. Okay. And again, another 5 or 6, maybe another 7 or 8 frames down the line, I will move it even further. So I'm going to pull it around over the top of itself and almost pull the circles in very much close together as if they're right on top of each other. And then as we head out towards 2 seconds, maybe a shade beyond that, let's grab that outer circle and pull the text around. Let's go around the other side here so it can come out from the underneath. Okay, so if we come back to the start of the timeline now and scroll through this, You see the effect of the text. We even have motion blur turned on here, and this definitely highlights what's going on. You see this wonderful spin as the characters cross over each other and then come out the other side and settle down into this final position. So I'll just hit 0, do a quick round preview of that, see it in full speed, and there we can see the characters. Now this is all done just with the simple polar coordinates filter being applied on top of text. Now it's definitely worth using the path text filter for this because it's an effect being rendered on top of an effect. The text itself doesn't get distorted or lose its quality because it's all being rendered at the same time. If we were using Illustrator or Photoshop text for this, it'd be very difficult to do because you need to rasterize those in order to apply effects to them. So this is certainly one of the cool things that you can play with polar coordinates. Again, let's come back down to the timeline. Let's just turn off the solo layer here so we see everything together. And then back in our comp window, we can do one final RAM preview of the whole thing. So what we did is we set an adjustment layer to work across the background layer and this background type, this yellow overlay type, which is a pre-made composition. And that is now distorting this background using polar coordinates with some very simple keyframe effects. Then we added our type over the top, which hasn't been affected. And then we turned on one last layer, which was path text, which had polar coordinates attached to it. So it gives some really cool effects once you start pulling those circular points around. Just hit 0 and do a full speed preview of that. You can see some wonderful effects. And this is all done using 3 very simple distortion filters. We just used Spherize, we used Smear, and we used polar coordinates to a great extent. And hopefully this is giving you some really cool ideas how you can distort your designs.